The Kawasaki Ki-3 was a light bomber that was developed for the Imperial Japanese Army in the early 1930s. Its origins can be traced back to a private venture to develop an army communications aircraft, the A-6. This was designed by Dr. Richard Vogt and Takeo Doi, who would later become Kawasaki's chief designer, with design work being completed towards the end of 1930. A prototype was built and completed by the autumn of 1931, with the aircraft making its maiden flight towards the middle of October. It was a two-man, single-engine biplane. It was built with an all-metal airframe, and the fuselage was covered in alloy sheet metal, and the wings were covered in doped fabric. Powered by a 450 horsepower license-built BMW 6 engine, the prototype demonstrated above-average performance. It was easy to handle, highly maneuverable, and in level flight it achieved a top speed of 296 km per hour, or 184 miles per hour. Officers from the Japanese army were impressed by its performance, however they could not accept this new design as a communications aircraft. The army had recently initiated a new policy. It would assess its own requirements for a particular aircraft, be it a fighter, bomber, reconnaissance aircraft, etc., and then it would assign certain manufacturers to produce them, rather than sending out a specification for manufacturers to then tender submissions for. The A6 had been developed before this change, and because of this it was deemed ineligible, as it was not built for a specific army requirement that they had drawn out, and Kawasaki had not been specifically approached to produce it. Happily though for Kawasaki, the project was not a total loss. A couple of years later, in 1932, the army gave them a contract to design and build a new light bomber, which would be designated as the Army Type 93. Its main purpose would be to provide tactical bombing support to ground troops. It was to be highly maneuverable, it would need a robust airframe to operate from rough and remote airstrips, and it would be powered by the new Kawasaki BMW 9. This was a supercharged version of the water-cooled V12 that would put out approximately 790 horsepower. To meet this new requirement, Dr. Vogt and Takeo Doi took the basic design of the A6 and transformed it into the Type 93 prototype. It was slightly larger and heavier than the A6, owing to various military equipment requirements, but at a glance it bore a remarkable similarity. The prototype was completed in April of 1933, and it made its maiden flight shortly thereafter. Two additional prototypes were then quickly built. Details of them are sketchy, but one appears to have tested a different tail design, and all three of these aircraft were put through a series of trials during the summer. They all performed satisfactorily, and in August of 1933, the Army accepted the design as the Type 93 light bomber, ordering it into production under a shorter designation of Ki-3. Production models differed little from the prototypes, aside from some disputed points about the design of the tail. Unfortunately, documentation is very scarce. The Ki-3 had a wingspan of 13 meters, or 42 feet 8 inches, a length of 10 meters, 33 feet 9 inches, and a height of 3 meters, 9 feet 10 inches, or thereabouts. It had a crew of two, a pilot and a rear gunner. The pilot operated a single forward-firing 7.7mm machine gun, and the gunner either had a single or a pair of them installed upon a flexible mount. Fully loaded, the Ki-3 weighed approximately 3,100 kilos, or 6,800 pounds. It could carry up to 500 kilograms of bombs, and with a military load it had a top speed of approximately 260 kilometers per hour, or 162 miles per hour. Production began in early 1934, and the Ki-3 first entered service with the 6th Composite Air Regiment, then based on the Korean Peninsula. Approximately 240 examples of this aircraft were eventually produced, 200 by Kawasaki and 40 by Tachikawa, and a good number of these would see action in Manchuria and in northern China during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Unfortunately, there is almost no record of how they performed during their service. This is partly due to source material on this conflict being scarce enough as it is in general, and source material on the aerial part of the conflict being incredibly scarce in particular, and also partly because most of the Ki-3s would actually be withdrawn from the front line incredibly quickly. During their brief combat stint, the Ki-3s were used as tactical bombers, cargo transports, and occasionally as reconnaissance aircraft. Their ruggedness and nimble handling endeared them to Japanese army pilots, but the litany of problems with its engine killed any budding affection for the aircraft stone dead. The Kawasaki BMW engine on its own was perfectly fine, but mating it to a supercharger, which was still a relatively new thing for the Japanese-era industry, had created a mechanical goblin, one which was not easily tamed. Indeed, not all of the problems were even completely solved, and many of the Ki-3s were eventually pulled from frontline service by the end of 1936. Their post-service history appears to be pretty much non-existent. There's no record of them being used in training squadrons, and considering the mechanical issues, it's easy to understand why, and it appears that most, if not all of them, were scrapped, with some of the spare materials going towards the development of their replacement. This would come in the form of two aircraft, the Mitsubishi Ki-3 and the Kawasaki Ki-32. But those are topics for another day. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you of course to the Patreon supporters. Once again, I'm going to be away for a little while for the rest of this month, however there are videos planned for release, so things should remain normal, schedule-wise. A big thank you, of course, to our Wing Commander tier patrons, our highest tier supporters. Work on the next series of deep dive videos is progressing well, and I'm hoping to have the next set released pretty soon, within the next few weeks, though there is no exact ETA on these videos, as producing them just takes as long as it takes. But it shouldn't be too much of a wait. But as always, thank you all so much for your continued support, and I will catch you all next time. Goodbye.